And now for something completely different.
Hey Sarah, I love that spring break vlog you posted on Zigazoo.
OMG, you watched it?
Yeah, it was so cool. I think you're so talented.
Said no one on social media ever. That hasn't stopped the industry from standing up a kids-only app as a gated social media platform to keep them safe. The big players have their own takes. TikTok is relying on its community to police what goes on in the app. YouTube is letting software do the work. And Meta has introduced things that go nudge in the night. But is industry self-regulation the right answer? Where, if anywhere, does government play in social media regulation? We've got questions and a few answers about the guardians of the peace. From the future in context, this is the debut episode of a new occasional series we're calling Government A to Z. It's a generational take on the intersection of technology, society, and government. I'm Ashley Silver from Government Technology, the A in A to Z.
I'm Zena Hutton from Governing, the Z in A to Z, but not the only one.
And I'm Zoe Manzanetti from Governing, another Z to add to the mix.
Great. And just to be clear, Zena, you write for Governing, and Zoe, you are the digital editor at governing.com, correct?
Yeah.
That is correct.
So I'm so happy to have you with me as we begin this adventure. We're going to begin where we all really live these days, which is on social media. So specifically, we want to look at the regulation of access to social platforms, specifically for those under the age of 18. And it can take three forms that we'll discuss today. So that's government, industry, parental, or it can be really a combination of the three that is sometimes called collaborative regulation. So let's dive into those elements. So as far as the government regulation is concerned, I have a bit of news coming out of Florida.
This morning, lawmakers in Florida approving what could be the most strict regulation on social media in the country. The House passing a bill that would prohibit anyone under the age of 16 from signing up for most social media platforms, even if they have their parents' approval.
It's like a digital fentanyl, and even the most plugged-in parent or attuned teen has a hard time shutting the door against these addictive features.
The bill targeting any social media site that tracks user activity, allows children to upload content, or uses addictive features designed to cause compulsive use.
They're just taking advantage of kids growing up.
Opponents say the bill infringes on parental rights and will face First Amendment challenges in court.
After the revamped plan was released on Friday, the tech industry group NetChoice and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a free speech group known as FIRE, released statements foreshadowing a First Amendment fight about the bill. They also pointed to courts blocking similar laws passed in other states. In Arkansas, Georgia, and Utah, bills were created aimed at preventing the creation of social media accounts unless you have parental consent if you're considered a minor. And they're all facing some type of legal pushback. So the Social Media Safety Act was signed by the governor of Arkansas last year, stating that social media sites must utilize third-party vendors to perform age verification checks for any users creating new accounts. But it was actually blocked by a higher court due to a lawsuit by, let us guess, NetChoice, once again, right after it was signed into law. And Utah passed similar legislation called the Utah Social Media Regulation Act and recently added 2 amendments to the bill. So they basically doubled down on their bill. And one of the amendments specifies that parents can actually sue social media companies if their child develops mental health issues after using the apps. And the only way that social media companies can avoid liability is by doing a number of things, like limiting minors' use to a maximum of 3 hours per day across all devices on social media, restricting a minor from accessing their account between the hours of 10:30 p.m. and 6:30, and disabling addictive, quote unquote, design elements for minors, such as autoplay for videos as you're scrolling through your social media feed. And the Utah bill was actually supposed to go into effect on March 1st, but that date was pushed back by their governor because of, you guessed it, lawsuits being filed. So now it's been pushed back to October. Zena, what are your thoughts on regulations of this type?
I think it's really clear these laws are coming from a really good place. Like, everybody wants to protect children. And we've all been on social media for a really large part of our lives. We've seen things that we wish we could unsee, and we're adults now. Like, our brains are very, very much fully developed. And so it makes sense, when legislators are hearing from their constituents, who are parents, what they're seeing in the news, they're responding to even what their own children and grandchildren are telling them. And what they're hearing is social media is lawless, dangerous, and harmful. So I understand everything behind the kind of legislative regulations that, we're seeing kind of proposed and pushed, but I also see immediately why we're running into lawsuits because, if you're trying to figure out who the kids are on the internet, you kind of have to know who everyone is on the internet. That means we're going to have to start uploading information to these sites, to these platforms. I don't know that they're capable of, maintaining securely. What's been really interesting is that even in blue states like California had their bill shut down because that was a age appropriate design bill, but it would still require you to know how old the person was using it. It makes a ton of difference if you think about how we use the internet. We hand our phones to people every single day. If you have younger siblings or if you share a phone with a family member, there are multiple people possibly using your devices at any given point. There are sometimes multiple people using your social media accounts. And so legislation like this, especially if you are a parent or you're the guardian of a child, that immediately gets in the way of your privacy, in the way of your routine. When I spoke, because I actually spoke to NetChoice and R Street, which is a center-right think tank. And, what came up for both was this takes the parenting out of social media. It puts government in and forces tech companies to step up in a way they maybe shouldn't. So that's where we are.
Next, we will talk about industry self-regulations. So Meta is offering a new nighttime nudges feature to help teens manage their time on Instagram at night. The nighttime nudges tool will appear on teens' Instagram screens when they have spent more than 10 minutes on the platform at night. These notifications remind teens that, hey, it's late, why don't you close up shop for the night, in a sense, prompting them to close the app. On the day of the rollout, Meta's Dana Gilwart had this to say.
We launched something called Nighttime Nudges. We know parents are always concerned about what their teens are doing at night, making sure they're getting enough sleep. So we launched a tool where it will actually send a notification to your teen if they are scrolling on Instagram between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. And it will encourage them to close the app and take a break.
So Zoe, as you're digesting all of this information, give us your take on nighttime nudges.
Yeah, I think as Zena said, I think that these are all being implemented with well intentions. I think that we are having the kids in mind as we're rolling out these policies. However, I think that they might not be as effectively implemented or regulated as Zena hinted at. I ultimately think that there are two separate camps for perspective on these nighttime nudges. And one is, as often happens with me, I will be scrolling late into the night and I will look up and realize that, oh my gosh, it's suddenly midnight. How did the past 2 or 3 hours disappear? So that could be a good reality check to kind of break you up from that mindless or addictive scrolling that Ashley mentioned earlier. However, the other side of the argument is exactly what Zena pointed out earlier. Who's to say that, Instagram should be managing nighttime routines of minors? And why shouldn't students be able to stay up until the wee hours of the morning? I mean, I grew up in a time when smartphones and apps were not as prevalent. However, I still had many, many nights in which I was up until, 1 or 2 in the morning, and I deeply regretted it the next day at school. And so maybe that's just a part of growing up and being a kid, is you have to learn those own boundaries. I also think that it seems a bit weird that these social media sites are putting on this kind of good neighbor regulation front, because it doesn't, in my perspective, seem frequent that social media companies will put their personal, their users' experiences above their own profits. And so I'm just concerned that this is a form of kind of social greenwashing, maybe social good washing, you might say. And so having to look into the nitty gritty details of these policies and all the regulations. And as Zena alluded before, how are they figuring out who is a minor, who is an adult, who's using what device? I think that can become pretty scary pretty quickly, and it can cross a lot of data privacy boundaries that I would want to know about if I were a parent or a user in general. I think that this can also be seen as simply a slippery slope for overreaching and regulation. I am generally pro-regulation. I think that government oversight is generally well-intended and tries to do good things. However, I'm not certain, again, that Instagram, Meta, Facebook, that they are the ones who I want regulating how to manage my day-to-day time and my habits. So I think that, especially in the early stages of this in setup and program, I think that making sure we're really cautious about what the finer details are and how they're actually managing and reviewing these things will be important.
It's interesting that you mentioned, what is making them stand up now regarding Meta to do something about this. And I think from their perspective, it probably has something to do with the lawsuits that are coming out, because basically, even in the Utah one that I mentioned earlier, it's saying, if the social media sites do these type things, well, the parents can't sue you for affecting their child's mental health. And one of them is limiting time on social media. And so it's kind of ironic, like you were saying, that now they have like this nighttime nudges tool and then a couple of other ones that they're partnering. And that's kind of the symbolism here, is partnering with parental units in order to do so. So if we're talking about, the parental and industry regulation kind of collaboration, we generally accept that parents or guardians do have the best interest of minors at heart. But of course, a parent can simply just take away phones at any time so that their child, to kind of self-regulate that in their own home. But that is less likely now than even 5 years ago, because young minors, even when they're attending school, they just can't go without having their phone and being able to communicate. So on the other side, that I guess it's helpful in a way for the industry to kind of step in and have certain regulations. Meta's Dana Gilwert again mentioned other tools that are being used by Meta in addition to nighttime nudges in order to kind of help parents or assist them or partner with them to regulate social media for minors.
At Meta, we really want to give parents and teens ways to navigate social media together. That's why we launched our supervision tools, because it really empowers parents to be able to manage their teens' experiences online. So with parental supervision, a parent can view how much time their teen is spending on Instagram, and they can also set daily time limits for their teen. So if you don't want your teen spending any more than 1 hour on Instagram, you can do that with supervision. You can also set blocking hours for the platform. So if you're concerned about your teen scrolling on Instagram when they're supposed to be doing homework or when they're meant to be at school and focusing in class, you can set those blocking hours with supervision.
Zena, are parental supervision tools like these necessary? And if so, are they sufficient?
I'm all in for kids' rights to privacy, but the value that these tools have cannot be understated, because I remember being a teenager on LiveJournal and MySpace, and I know that's a really dated reference, but I was completely unmonitored, and no one could tell me what to do on those sites, not even other people on those sites. And had my mom or my dad, utilized, even the early forms of monitoring or supervision tools, like both on these platforms or through a third party, maybe I would have gotten into less fights on the internet, And I also think that with the tech companies working in conjunction with parents, providing them with resources and showing them how to use the tools, parents can then bring that to their kids. So you can sit down with your teenager and talk to them about how long you want them on TikTok, how long you want them on their computers doing non-school websites. I don't think it should be the first step. in the kind of path to making sure teens are being responsible on the internet or using their screens an appropriate amount of time. I think that first step should be, parent engagement. But I think that it's a necessary step, and that if it's a collaboration between parents and platforms rather than government platform kind of overriding parent, I think it's actually potentially really great.
It brings me to another question. Are there similar offerings on other platforms? And are they better, worse, or the same, or not really comparable to Insta's nighttime nudges?
One example that I could think of, and it was kind of the only example I could think of, was how YouTube has an option where they can limit content for children. And so, especially as content creators upload videos or shorts into their system, they can make a tag that says this content is geared for children or it is not geared for children. And YouTube on the back end will then push that video out differently to different audiences.
TikTok has a user-generated moderation. Sometimes when you're scrolling, you'll watch a video, and as you go to scroll up, you'll see, is this video appropriate? And it'll either say, is it appropriate for, I think, teenagers or children? Or it'll say, is this appropriate for TikTok, period. And you can either say yes or no, or explain why. You don't have to do it. I usually just scroll past because I was like, I'm not great at this. Unless it's something that's objectively harmful or illegal, I'll report it first, actually. But yes, TikTok does have something kind of similar to YouTube, except it's not the person uploading the video who is responsible for it. It's the people who come across it.
Which then I think adds a different layer of regulation, in that everyone has their own perspective as to what is appropriate and what isn't. Again, going back to companies versus parents, and how do we know what's best for each individual child and family.
Zena, I know you also had some strong feelings about the importance of privacy and autonomy given to minors, and the right for teens to be empowered rather than precluded from making their own decisions with this type of regulation.
I think my main thing with nudges, both on Instagram and TikTok, is that they kind of feel a little infantilizing. Part of it is because on TikTok, at least, you're getting a video of somebody using their softest, most gentle voice telling you you've been awake for too long. What are you doing? And I'm not a preschooler, and I think that that's infuriating. And I can't imagine a teenager coming across, at 3 a.m, disrupting their perfectly curated timeline with this reminder that actually TikTok thinks you're a baby and they need you to go Betty bye. I cannot imagine how terrible that must feel for a teenager. For most people, when something disrupts their way of doing something or tells them that, hey, you can't do this anymore, their response is usually to keep doing the thing. And that's where I look at the phenomenon known as revenge bedtime procrastination, which is kind of the coolest thing ever because it gives us a name for what we do after work instead of sleeping. Because instead of teenagers going to sleep on their own time, like if you're at 2, 3 a.m, a teenager scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, and you get a nudge or you get the TikTok gentle reminder, what are the chances of these teenagers actually going to sleep? Because I'm an adult and I would like to stay awake for another hour. What will teenagers do?
When I'm looking at these regulations, a lot of the time, the lawmakers, the governors, whoever is supporting it, they throw mental health in there a lot. And they have studies, they have Gallup studies that say that certain groups of people, certain groups of ages, have more suicidal ideations when they spend more time on social media. And they've done all of these stories to kind of link mental health with teen mental health, specifically with more time on social media. And then you have psychologists saying that the overconsumption of social media can trigger a fight or flight mentality, particularly in teens, because their brains aren't all the way developed. And our nervous systems can't really handle the amount of information that's being thrown at us from every part of the world on X or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. So I guess that's something to kind of take into account when talking about like these tools, and who knows if they'll work. I mean, even with the nighttime nudges, in my research, you can just remove the notification. It's not going to do anything. It doesn't really prevent you from continuing to scroll. Now, I think they do have some other tools where a parental unit or a guardian can actually put in a password. They can restrict you from getting on social media if you're at school, if you're supposed to be doing homework or something for a certain period of time, and you have to actually put in a password in order for that to be lifted. But the nighttime nudges is just, I mean, you could just swipe it out of the way and keep going. So I think as time evolves, they're lawmakers, parents, they're really passionate, I guess I could say, about finding some type of way to balance privacy with the mental health aspect of teens being on social media.
One of the things that I'm seeing with all of these conversations about legislation and regulation is that most of these people aren't talking to teenagers. They're not talking about what they would like in terms of regulation and moderation. The regulations that are proposed don't really cover the ways that teenagers are directly impacted by harms on social media. It doesn't cover exploitation. They don't cover in person, your school has yik yak. They're not covering anonymous harassment. It's not very helpful.
Part of the Future in Context podcast, and having provided a good dose of context, what do you think the future holds in this area?
Anything to help improve teen mental health, I think, is really important. Nighttime nudges are a way to better aid and support teen mental health. I think that is a great start.
I think that there are ways that we can, see legislators push better laws, maybe not around regulation necessarily or anything that takes the total control out of parents and teenagers' hands. Legislation that focuses on education, on media literacy, which we're seeing in a couple states like New Jersey, and I think even Florida is looking to do social media literacy. There is a really strong potential to retool this, to retool our approach to social media, to retool how teenagers and adults interact on social media. I just still don't really think apps and kind of the government should be our first step.
I agree. I'm interested in seeing how this landmark amendment about being able to sue social media companies if you think your child is experiencing mental health issues because of the applications. I'm interested to see if that actually takes effect in October because, as you guys were saying, lawsuits. So I'm sure there are many more to come. But I do think that we've made some good arguments on both sides. And this was fun. And I do thank you both for contributing to the very first episode of Generation A to Z.
Yeah, looking forward to many more.
Yeah, let's do this.
And that is our first trip around the alphabet with Government A to Z on the Future in Context. We'll cycle around again soon. I'm Ashley Silver from Government Technology, the A in A to Z, and I brought friends.
I'm Zena Hutton from Governing, the Z in A to Z, but not the only one.
And I'm Zoe Manzanetti from Governing, another Z to anchor the alphabet.
Our editorial and production team includes Theo Douglas and Kaylee Tedrow. Our producer is Paul Taylor. And our editors-in-chief are Dustin Heisler and Kathalia Robinette.
Government A to Z is a monthly feature on the Future in Context.
You can subscribe to our podcast for free on the app of your choice: Spotify, Apple, Odyssey, and Audible. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend, or two, or all of them. We'd appreciate it.
For Ashley Silver and Zena Hutton, I'm Zoe Manzanetti. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.